Thank you, Tip. Want to begin immediately by giving proper recognition to Dr. Ma. This is part of his PhD dissertation, and when you see the number of tissues and the number of fetal pigs and things like that, and the number of digestions that went on, a lot of work here, tremendous amount of work. All right, we know that over the past 10 years we've seen an increase in total pigs born per litter. If you look at some pig champ records, you see the same trend in live born per sow per year, wean per sow per year. All of that's good and something we select for genetically. But with the increase in sow performance, we still have some problems, and they relate to culling and mortality. High culling rates, an obvious economic cost that we would wish we could reduce somewhat. Probably even more so, death rates like this. Not a good thing. And raises questions then, are there aspects of our feeding of sows that are inadequate or areas which we don't understand that are contributing to this ill health? If it is, then what are the most stressful times for the sow? One of those is in lactation, and this is some work from Don Mahan and Betsy Newton, where they took sows, went through 3 parities, and then after the end of 3 parities, they compared those sows, their body composition with regard to minerals, to some contemporaries, in some cases litter mates, that had never been bred, but were the same age. And what they find, that is, there's a marked depletion, 5 to 20% in total body calcium, phosphorus, all those minerals there. And additionally, for those sows that weaned litters greater than 55 kilograms, or those that were the better milking sows or had the larger litters, those you had a much greater decline in total body minerals than if the sows had nursed small litters. So certainly there is pressure on nutrient needs of sows in lactation. The other time when there's need for nutrients is during fetal development, and we'll look at that here today a bit. Now, there's been some recent research that has looked at those needs during gestation. We'll show you first the studies that prompted this research and then some additional information that came out while we were conducting this. But certainly there is a dynamic nature of fetal development, and so raising the question of whether we need to feed the sow differently, do a phased feeding during gestation just like we would during growing and finishing period. The first study that prompted a lot of our interest came out of Texas Tech, Dr. Sung-Woo Kim's lab, published in 2004. There were a couple papers, but what they showed was that, and I think probably most of you have seen this, the fetal development curve, obviously early on in gestation, not very much going on in terms of fetal development, but in the latter stages, a lot going on. And if you look at fetal protein, then there was a break point at day 68.5, where up to that point you're only depositing 0.2 grams of protein per day, whereas 4.6 in that period after that. This work led Dr. Dave Baker in this symposium in 2005, I've got the year right there, to say, does that mean we need to consider phase feeding? So he said, if you look at these 2 periods, then the lysine needed in early gestation was only 6.8 grams per day for that fetal development, while in late gestation it was 15.3. And if we're feeding a diet, and I don't know what the crude protein or lysine level that he used or the amount of feed per day, but he said if we're feeding a normal single gestational diet of 10 grams per day of lysine, then that raises the question of whether in late gestation the sow has already begun to catabolize her body tissues in order to meet the needs of the developing fetus. So, certainly needed more work. Well, at this point, we raise the question, well, we've got a lot of good data here from the Texas Tech work about ether extract, about crude protein, and about just total ash, but we wondered, what about the trace minerals? Well, we started our study, but before we finished, Don Mahan published a study that already gives some of the values. So, you know, really, we started before Don published this. It was our own idea. So, But Don has done so much work with multi-parity studies and so much with the sow, and he's not here today. I wish he could be, but Don is a sow man, and so really appreciate this. But the beauty of this is, and we'll show a little bit of his work, is now at least with the work that I'll show you today and that we've got in the proceedings, and we're in the process of writing up for publication, but now we have 2 studies that are looking at crude protein and ether extract and some of these major proximate analysis constituents. We have the Texas Tech and the UK stuff, and we've now got the Ohio State looking at some minerals, and we've got UK. I really think because of the agreement between these data sets, we've got a good handle on what our deposition is for a lot of these nutrients that we didn't have 5 years ago. If anybody wants to do more of this, that's great. It's a lot of work, and I'm glad that the studies all agree fairly well. Okay, Don's work with the macro minerals. And in fact, in one of his talks here, probably about 2007, he presented some of this information. But here's the deposition curve for calcium and phosphorus, and you see that follows very closely either the total fetal weight or the protein deposition curve out of Texas Tech. Iron and zinc, 2 trace minerals, difference in total amount deposited in the fetus. Selenium, somewhat similar curve. The manganese curve that he showed had a little bit of a different shape to it there. But so, we've got some information already. So our objectives were to evaluate gross fetal development curves similar to Texas Tech, but it's a different genotype. Texas Tech was PIC. We've got a fairly traditional rotational cross. We've tried to stick with just an F1 York Landrace female and come on top with a York boar, but sometimes it's not all that. But so anyway, it's a normal cross like we've had for years. We wanted to add to that work the trace mineral deposition curves, and as well as looking at the fetus, because of Dave Baker's comments about is the sow catabolizing her tissue already, we wanted to measure several maternal tissues. So we're getting the fetuses anyway, so we're measuring liver mineral levels, kidney mineral levels, some muscle levels, and then we're measuring uterus, placenta. So we've got a lot of the products of conception that didn't have information on before. And then in addition to that, we wanted to examine the effects of a source of trace mineral, specifically selenium, that's known to differ in tissue deposition, to see what effect that would have throughout gestation. So here's the treatments that we had. The selenium, as I said, was an actual treatment. We fed at 0.3 part per million, added either Cellplex, Altex product, or sodium selenite. Then we thought I had another box. I didn't. The iodine we had at this level, and these other trace minerals, which were a primary interest to us, were added as the bioplexes. We added them at 150% of the NRC requirement estimate. So we wanted to make sure that we had enough there so we know what the maximal deposition was in a developing fetus. Eventually this data hopefully can be used in some sorts of modeling work when we start to look at the bioavailability, digestibility of different trace minerals. So, in the pregnant gilts, just the reproductive performance was measured, obviously litter size, conception rate, growth rate, things like that. And then the nutrient changes in those maternal tissues that I mentioned. In the fetuses, the fetal characteristics just as length, weight, and then nutrient composition in those fetuses. All the analysis were done by ICP mass spec. We do not have all the minerals done yet. We are in the process of trying to get not only these that we're already supplementing, but those that we're not supplementing. Because how many times throughout our careers do people tell you, well, we all know you don't need that. And in 5 years, 6 years, you find that some dummy's gone and done an experiment and found out we do need that. So we don't want to assume that just the minerals that we added, those 4, iron, zinc, copper, and manganese, the selenium, that those are all the trace minerals you need. So we are in the process of trying to analyze for the magnesium and the potassium and the sodium and some of these others too, because in the absence of any information, how do we know that we don't need them? Anyway, here's the process we went through. Started with 100 gilts. We slaughtered those for some tissue mineral contents at the beginning at 6 months. That brought us down to 92. Half of those on each diet, either the organic selenium or the inorganic. 2 months later, at 8 months, we bred those. We also, at 8 months, we slaughtered some more. Now these 3 that were slaughtered at day 0 when breeding started, they would have then should have been able to demonstrate some response to the dietary treatment. After confirming pregnancy, then these are the days that we slaughtered throughout gestation. We don't have the information here today, but actually the conception rate was so good on this study that we had extra animals, so we actually took these things on out to day 21 of lactation. So we actually have both prenatal deposition as well as postnatal deposition, so a pretty nice response curve. But only the gestational we'll be looking at today. Now, I'll show you in your book what you have is the time course of gestation. You do not have the selenium responses. There were not a lot of selenium responses other than selenium content of the tissues. I'll show you the selenium treatment effects here. That's not in your book. But then we'll move quickly into those time course responses. You see that with regard to this weight and length of the fetus or the litter or the placenta encasing each fetus, no significant differences there. Now, we did have significant differences. I don't know that they have any particular meaning, but I show them to you. On gestation gain, weight of the uterus on average, total placenta weight for a litter. So some tendencies there, but not consistently the case. Total gestation gain a little bit less for the organic source, but the uterus was a little bit greater. Total placenta weight a little bit less. So I don't know that we're seeing anything of much biological meaning there. If we look at the nitrogen content of muscle, which is on a percentage basis, and then liver, uterus, placenta, amniotic fluid, fetuses, we don't see any difference, nor do we see any ether extract differences due to selenium. I would not have anticipated them. We did not see them. Now, looking at the trace mineral content, the concentration in maternal liver. Here we see, we've got to have a box there. We expected to see the organic source to be higher. That was, in fact, the case. We did see a higher level of manganese in the maternal liver. Don't know the meaning again, so perhaps you can all help me with that. Fetal liver, mineral concentration. Higher level of selenium, as we would expect. It's incorporated into the protein as selenomethionine. Should be there, and it is. Fetus, trace mineral composition. The earlier one, just before, was fetal liver. This is now fetal body. Again, as we would expect, a higher level of selenium there. This time we see a little higher level of iron. So we're not seeing the consistency. If the manganese was higher in one tissue, we don't see it in the next. We see iron a little higher here, not in the former. So I'm not sure these aren't just some random false positives, so to speak. Now we'll look at the selenium concentration in maternal liver across gestation. So starting out at breeding day 0, we had no difference there in the maternal liver, but it is there throughout the entire time. It was significant overall from the previous slide. This just shows you the time course of it. And the open gilts, the ones that were not confirmed pregnant, we slaughtered some of those out here at that same time as we slaughtered these last ones, the bred ones, and we do see that difference there in maternal liver. In the fetal liver, the concentration, it's there from day 58 on throughout. the concentration is going down, which simply means that the body's growing faster than we are depositing selenium, but the selenium treatment effect is there throughout. Then that's concentration in the fetal body. I'm going to back up a slide. That was liver. So you see you're at about 3 milligrams per kilogram of liver. We go to body, obviously a little bit less, but consistently there. Highly significant difference. Nitrogen change, or the crude protein, such as Texas Tech was talking about, development of that fetus. So we do see highly significant development, deposition of nitrogen in that fetus. But you can see the uterus also. In fact, I think the next slide is going to give us day 115. Our last slaughter day was day 108, but we have these regression curves for all of these minerals, so we can put a day 115 in there and project what it would be. Tremendous need also for the developing uterus. The uterus has got to stretch and grow to contain the bigger pigs. It does that, and we have a fairly significant nitrogen need for the uterus. I'm going to keep going. I told Tip I was going to try and get done on time, so now we got to look at these time differences. We're pretty soon going to get into the figures. Ether extract. This is just total grams. You have these things in your book. You've got the total grams of each of those nutrients deposited. So you can do calculations of total maternal intake and total grams deposited. So, fetal growth curve, that's what we've got. It's very close to Texas Tech. There are some differences though. At day 108, we're sitting at about 1.6 kilos. At day 91 is where we get about half of that. So day 91 onward, we've got over 50% of the deposition into that fetus. It's a pretty important time in terms of total maternal needs. If we do a breakpoint analysis of fetal body itself, we're looking at about day 67. So for Texas Tech, the protein was day 68.5, I believe. So good agreement there. Whole liter selenium, we see, now this is again, you saw before the concentration. This is now the total amount deposited during gestation. So that's what we're getting. Trace mineral deposition for selenium averaged over, should be a break point here, averaged over both of those selenium treatments, we get a day 71. Table 5 in your proceedings gives you break points for all of these and gives you total grams deposited. So if you're thinking about doing any kind of reformulation of diets and targeting for when you want this to occur, you can look at those break points in Table 5 and develop something. But day 71 on the selenium, so again, very close agreement. Day 70 on the fetal nitrogen deposition for breakpoint. We've got a lot of agreement here in all these. If we look at iron and zinc, we've got curves that are very similar to what Don Mahan presented. So again, we've got agreement between two studies. You have the regression curves there. If they're not printed in there, I can't remember all that we put in the proceedings, but they're certainly available from us. And the breakpoints, a little bit of difference there. Zinc obviously not accreting quite as quickly. There's manganese, same type of curve. Day 67. Copper, kind of a funky one, but you can still do breakpoint for whatever it's worth. That's saying about day 91. Copper was, on a lot of things, was a bit different than the other trace minerals. So don't know if something's going on there that we're not aware of at all or not. Just want to show here, look at some of these. The last 2 weeks of gestation, 22 milligrams deposited. It takes more than the first, 93, 4, 5 days to get the first 22 milligrams. So we've got breakpoints in the rate of accretion that occur around day 70 for a lot of these. But if you look at absolute amount of deposited nutrient, these last 2 weeks are really big. A lot of nutrients being deposited there. So in conclusion, the results demonstrate extremely dynamic nutrient change throughout gestation, and day 70 is probably a good break point with some of those things in terms of total fetal weight. The last 50% of deposition was after day 91. So you can look at things differently here, but day 91 is important, day 70 is important, the last 2 weeks. You've got a lot of options for thinking of how you might perhaps modify a diet depending on your feeding management and the sow housing. But the organic source of selenium deposits more in the maternal tissues and fetuses compared with selenite. We would expect that. It showed itself to be true. The organic source of selenium had no effect on the other response measurements. Now, just a little plug for this. Digestive Physiology of Pigs, there's a website, look it up. Digestive Physiology of Pigs has been going for 33 years. This will be the 36th symposium. It's done every 3 years. It's generally been held in Europe. Was held in 2003 in Banff. But we've not had a lot of U.S. representation of that. I'd say check it out and look at it. A lot of excellent basic science, but also a lot of practical feeding things too. It's out in Keystone, Colorado this year, first time in the U.S., but check out the website. It might be something of interest to you or someone in your organization. So Tip, I'll give it back to you.